So today I'm going to be talking about families, parents, children, and our responsibilities to each other. And I know that we've all had totally different experiences. Some have had some great families, some have had some terrible experiences. Some of you, I know, have been abused. So today, you'll just have to listen to the sermon and see what part relates to your life and your situation, because there's no way I can preach to every individual family setting and situation of everyone here today. So I know you realize that. So what I want to do this morning is invite you to just listen for what God wants to say to you as I preach today. If you read in your Bible, you'll find some pretty mixed up families. In fact, it's hard to find healthy families in the Bible. Do you remember the very first family? I mean, you probably don't remember them personally, but you remember reading the story, right? There was Adam and Eve, and their first two sons' names were what? Cain and Abel, right. Why do we remember those names? Because Cain killed Abel, right? What kind of family dynamic is that when one son murders another son? An interesting story. A few chapters later in Genesis there we come and there's Noah, and who is a very righteous man. Matter of fact, God chose him and his family to save humanity. And so they build the ark, they get on the ark, and they have all these things going on that's great. And then later on we find, if you read through the passage, that Noah ends up with a drinking problem. His sons had to cover up for him quite literally. He would be out there, and as a result of his embarrassment because of that, then his son that finds him naked, he pronounces a curse on one of his sons and says that he and his descendants are going to have to be slaves to the others and all of their children. A few chapters later, we get right into Abraham and Sarah. Abraham is the father of the three major religions in the world right now: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three of those. Abraham is the father of that. Abraham's married to Sarah. We won't even talk about the fact that Abraham, to save his own skin, gave his wife away to another guy for a while so he could sneak out and stay away. We won't even talk about that. But here's Abraham and Sarah, and the wealth is to have children and to have success, have progeny, have people to come after you. And so they couldn't have children. Sarah comes up with this plan. She tells Abraham, well, why don't you sleep with my slave, my maidservant here, and Hagar, and just have a baby with her, and then I'll take the baby for my own. Thank goodness we don't do that anymore, at least legally. But Hagar becomes Abraham's common law wife, if you will, and she has a son, and they named him Ishmael. And then several years later, about the time Abraham's 100 and Sarah's 90, according to the story, Sarah conceives, and she has a son, and they name him Isaac. Now you've got some really interesting dynamics in this family. Can you imagine? Sarah is not very happy about Hagar and Ishmael being around, and so she insists, because the oldest son gets all the stuff, right? And so she insists that Hagar and Ishmael, be gone. So basically, he's gone, and they send him away. There's no child support. There's no anything. Matter of fact, they give him about enough food and water for a week, and then expect they may just die out in the desert after that. Interesting family dynamic, don't you think? For the father of all three of those faiths. And then Isaac, the one who was born, the promised one, he grows up, gets married to Rebekah. They have twin sons, and as you can imagine, things didn't go very well for them either, because Esau and Jacob are the sons, and each parent has a favorite son. Isaac loves Esau. Rebekah, the mom, loves Jacob more. And so some of you have grown up in families where you feel like mom or dad maybe had a favorite, and so there's always there's confusion about that and all that going on and the issues, but there's no confusion in this family. There's for sure, Dad loves Esau, Mom loves Jacob, and so what does that do to a family? Well, when Isaac can no longer see, he got old when he could no longer see. Rebekah brought Jacob in and pretended that he was Esau. Remember, they're twins. And she made sure that Isaac gave Jacob the biggest part of the inheritance. Esau was mad, needless to say, and so was Isaac. And so Esau wants to kill his brother. Now, Jacob then has to flee for his life. And while he's on the run, he goes and he starts working for this guy named Laban. And he meets Laban's daughter, Rachel, and he falls in love. I mean, so finally life's going to get better for this family, right? He wants to marry her, and he says, what do I need to marry? He said, well, if you work for me for 7 years, you can have part of the sheep, and then you can marry my daughter. And so that's fine. He works, and then when they wore heavy veils and stuff back then, and when the morning after the wedding, he lifts the veil, and it's Leah. It's not Rachel. It's Rachel's older sister. He goes to Laban and says, what's the deal? And he says, well, the oldest daughter has to get married first in our society. And so now, if you want to marry Rachel, you have to work for me 7 more years. And so now you have 2 wives that are sisters. One of them you don't want. One you do want. So can you imagine what this family looks like? What that's going to be like sitting around the dinner table, right? And so, they start having this competition to see who can have the most babies. I know it sounds funny in our society today, but that's what they did in those days, okay? They find out who can have the most babies to gain the affection of their husband, to give their husband the most wealth, the most male children. And so, following the family tradition, apparently, they started having their maidservants go in with Jacob. And so he starts having babies by all 4 of these women. And time you get to, and so each, like, if it was Leah's maidservant, then she gets to count those children for herself. And Rachel's gets to count those children, her maidservant's children, for herself. And so what happens up in the end is Jacob has 12 sons. Jacob plays favorites just like Mom and Dad did. He loves Rachel's oldest son, Joseph. And all the other brothers hated Joseph as a result, wanted to kill him. Finally ended up selling him into slavery and told their dad that he was killed by a wild animal. Yeah? So biblical families had their problems. It's hard, actually, to find a healthy family in the Bible. It's difficult and challenging because humans are broken. If we weren't broken and marred by sin, we wouldn't need Jesus. We wouldn't need the Holy Spirit to transform us. Both children and parents are marred by sin. And so it's hard to find the perfect families. Matter of fact, there's only probably a couple of perfect families here today, right? Your mom and dad never yelled at you or raised their voice to you. They never did anything wrong in raising you. They never wrongly chastised you. You had the perfect family childhood. Your siblings were awesome. There were 2 or 3 of you here today, and if that's you, I'm pretty sure you're in serious therapy right now because the rest of the world you live in is not that way. And if you were that protected and that perfect growing up, then you don't know how to deal with the rest of us crazies, right? Sometimes you have to figure out how to deal with those of us who didn't grow up that way. You're going to have to figure out how you relate to all of these other people whose life is not perfect. If you had that perfect family, give God thanks. That's a wonderful gift, seriously. But that's not the case for, by far, the most of us. Because people make mistakes. We struggle. We have our challenges. We've all grown up in families that are somewhere between the Huxtables, and the Cosby Show, and Abraham and Sarah, and all the weirdness of their generations. So with that in mind, I want us to try to understand a little more about our responsibility, what it is to our responsibility toward our children, toward our parents. But before we do that, I want to talk to us as parents toward our children. And this is children, whether they're no matter the age. I'm not talking about age group. I'm talking about people that whether they're child age or adults. So my experience in talking with other parents is that a lot of us carry around a fair amount of guilt about not being the best parent. You know, we have in our minds what the perfect parent is supposed to look like, and we try, but we never quite measure up to that. We've tried, and we've tried again, but we just can't get this parent thing perfected. We think we have it down, and then if our children are still young, you know, it's one of those deals where they just push that one button that nobody should ever push. And we yell at them, or at least raise our voice at them, or in some way they know we're mad. And then we may over-discipline them. We don't show up to every single thing that they do, and they may think that we don't love them. And then, you know, sometimes kids are pretty good at reinforcing all of our guilt, right? You know, you're the meanest mom or dad in the world, or you know, I hope nobody else has to have parents like you, or whatever it is they might say. And if you've not heard that, you may still get a chance. So don't think you're being left out. Here's the deal. Every parent loses her or his cool at some time. Everybody blows it. Every parent makes mistakes, just like our parents did, right? Because we're not perfect. I mean, think about Mary, and I'm talking about the Mary of Mary and Joseph fame, right? Back in the Bible, New Testament. Surely Mary got frustrated with Jesus at some point. Surely. The only story we have of Jesus was when he was a boy. He was about 12 years old. They're 3 days into the journey, and she looks around. Oops, I forgot Jesus. Now, there's a story that goes around my family that my mom and dad, there were 5 of us kids, and they went home from church one night, back when we had church at nighttime too, and they went home from church at night, and they were getting all the kids ready for bed, and they started putting them in bed, and one slot was open, and they realized they'd left me at the church asleep on a pew. And so one of them run back and got me real fast, and I was still asleep, so it didn't matter, I guess. But it wasn't 3 days, right? 3 days? Come on. I mean, then they go and they find him in the temple, you know. And then he had some reason for being there. Read the story. It's a great story. So all of this is part of being a parent. Part of what we have to be able to do is to experience and accept grace for ourselves, because here's the fact: you are not going to be the perfect parent. We've got to accept that we're not perfect. And then we have to do the best we can. Now, don't forget that part. But then we also have to accept grace for ourselves. We have to accept that we're not perfect, do the best we can, accept the grace, though. And maybe pray this prayer: Lord, help me be the best parent I can. What a simple prayer. But you know, if you start your day with it, or you're getting ready you're going in to get the kids up, and you know they're hard to get up in the morning, maybe that's a good prayer to pray. Lord, help me be the best parent I can be today. Pray for your children every day. At the end of the day, after you've messed up, ask forgiveness and try again. That's how it works. God uses our mistakes, I guess, to sanctify and shape our children. None of us are perfect. Accept that fact, and then accept the fact that God's grace is good enough, will cover you. Okay? It's sufficient for you. Trust that God is able to take what you do as a mother or a father and finish the work that you've done. Now, I want to take the rest of the time this morning to talk about the relationships with the other direction. And that's, for lack of better words, I'll call it the ministry of children. So we're talking about, if you're a parent, you know about parenting. But also there's the ministry of children to the parents. God calls us to minister, or at very least, or at least to relate positively to our parents. Our parents need our ministry, and God wants us to live in a certain way, a certain way as children to those parents. So I want us to take a couple looks at what the Bible has to say. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16, 10 commandments. Okay? So let's go there. Let's just read the fifth commandment. It says this. This is 5:16 of Deuteronomy. Honor your father and mother exactly as the Lord your God requires, so that your life will be long, so that things will go well for you on the fertile land that the Lord your God is giving you. It's a powerful scripture. It's a fifth commandment. Now, you know that the first four commandments deal in our relationship with us and God. We talked about that last week. So this is the fifth commandment. The last six talk about our relationships with other human beings. So before the commandments against murder, adultery, and stealing, before they're even mentioned, God commands us to honor our father and our mother. I think that tells us how important this is to God. It's the only commandment that comes with a promise. It says, if you do, you'll live a long life in the land I've given you. And this verse gives us the key to God's social security plan. Not the social security plan that we know today, but God's social security plan. If you care for, if you honor your parents, you're going to find out that you are modeling for the next generation how they should take care of you. So here's the thing. If you treat your parents shoddily, expect the same from your children, because that's how you're modeling, okay? If you do it well, expect your kids to do the same. So here's the thing. Sometimes there is a challenge in honoring our parents, right? I mean, you got your imperfection from somewhere, right? I mean, sometimes parents can be irritating and frustrating. They can do things that hurt us, that wound us. It's hard. I mean, they're not perfect either. It's also hard because, we're not perfect. They're not perfect. We struggle with sin and brokenness, and sometimes it's just difficult to honor our fathers and mothers. Sometimes we remember things that have happened in life, and we don't want to do that. But I want to take us back for a moment and think. Last week I introduced some of you and reminded some of you about the Martin Buber's the I-thou or I-you relationship and the I-it relationship as we relate to everything and everyone around us. The I-it relationship in our dealings with our families. The I-it is the relationship, I'm the star of my own movie. Everyone else is coming in out of my scenes. They're not even co-stars. They're just kind of extras that come in and out of my scenes because this is my life. It's all about me. What are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me? What are you going to do to make me happier in life? It's that I-it relationship that Martin Buber talked about. But then there's the I-thou relationship, or the I-you relationship, which says that you have sacred worth in and of yourself, that you don't exist simply to meet my needs, but you exist as a person of great worth. The I-thou relationship is a dialogue. I'm interested in you for who you are rather than just for what you can do for me. I'm interested in seeing how I can minister to you and not simply what I can get out of you. So the challenge is this. When we're born into an I-it relationship. When you're a baby and you poop in your diaper at night, you start crying. Your parents come running. That's how it works. You're the baby. You're the center of attention. You're the star of the show. You don't care if your parents need rest. That's the least of your worries. You could care less. You just know that you have a need and you want it fixed. And as we grow older, our children find different ways to get our attention. Our son, our youngest, because I don't know, all the distractions were going on in lives, I guess, he would get in front of you and he would grab your face like this, and he would hold you and make you look at him and talk to you, because he wanted to make sure he had your undivided attention, because the world was his, all right? See, as we grow up, we need to come to see, or should come to see, and most of us do come to see this, not really all just about me. And so we need to go back to that place from the time we're younger to the time we're older. How can I minister to my parents? What can I do to be a good relationship, build healthy relationship with my parents? How can I be sensitive to them? We're supposed to grow, but it's hard to do that sometimes. I mean, sometimes parents make it hard because they're our parents and they always want to be our parents, right? And so it's just, we have to work at it. So there has to be this fundamental change that happens in our relationship with our parents. We have to grow to see our parents as people who are doing their best. Yes, they messed up, but they're doing their best, or they did their best. And so we also have to learn how to cope with our parents' flaws and quirks. The Apostle Paul, when he's talking about how to deal with relationships with people, he gives us a great example from Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15. It says this. He says, "Therefore, as God's choice, holy and loved, put on," these are the things the way we're supposed to relate to other people: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Be tolerant with each other. And if someone has a complaint against anyone, forgive each other. As the Lord forgave you, so also forgive each other. And over all these things put on love, which is a perfect bond of unity. The peace of Christ must control your hearts, a peace unto which you were called in one body, and be thankful people. So when we relate to our parents, we should be clothed with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. So guys, I love the youth group. You're my favorite group, okay? So what would happen if before you got out of bed and you went down and you're hanging with mom and dad in the morning and you're tired and upset and you went to bed too late and you really didn't want to get up this early and they make you do all the things you want to do. They like make your bed before you go to school, whatever it is. So what would happen if you said a prayer before you went downstairs or you went out to the rest of the house and you said, "God, help me be compassionate, kind, humble, meek, and patient with mom and dad this morning"? What would happen if that happened? Would they be like afraid? Wonder what happened to you? Probably would have been the case when I was your age at least. Parents, what would happen if before we went in to wake our kids up knowing we're going to have issues with some of them getting out of bed, if we would pray the prayer and say, "God, help me to show my children this morning compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience"? What if that was on our mind? What if that was the center of our attention, was we were going to get them out of bed in the morning? I think it's important that we consider these things when we deal with one another. It helps our family relationships drastically, don't you think? So in this short scripture that Paul offers here that we just read, there are 5 ways that we can minister to our families. And just very, very quickly, he says first there we must bear with each other even when we frustrate each other. He says secondly that we need to forgive each other. Your families are the training ground for forgiveness, right? At some point, you forgive people in your family for the fact that we're all stuck together and all the weirdness that we are, and you learn to forgive there first. When you do that, you can forgive anyone. If you can forgive family, you can forgive anyone, including yourself. Third, love your parents and and learn to put their needs ahead of our own. I think that I see that in there. The fourth, well, first off, that's a sign of maturity, and fourth is to be thankful for the family God has given us. Be thankful for the family God has given us. Be thankful people. Even when we go through difficult times, be thankful. So then how do we, Paul tells Timothy, let me put it this way. Paul tells Timothy in his first letter to Timothy, he says this, he says, if a woman, listen to the words of this, if a woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should take care of them and not burden the church so that it can help other widows who are truly needy. Now, this is not a statement that women are to do this and men are supposed to do so. What Paul's talking to is a specific relationship where women could not own property, they could not hold regular jobs, earn income, some of those things. So what would happen was the men had to do those things, and if a woman did not have a man in her life, she did not have any income, she didn't have any of these things, and so the women took care of the house, they ruled the house. And so what he's telling is the women is he says, if there's those in your family that need the help, that don't have a way to help themselves, bring them in because your husband will also help provide for them. So it's not just the woman's job, and that's not what Paul's saying here. He's saying is bring them into the home because when they come into the home, then the family takes care of them. And I've watched several from this congregation and different ones over the years take care of their aging parents. And I know sometimes it's frustrating, but it's a beautiful thing to see the way that some of you honor and love your parents. It is. And so this brings me to kind of what I want to talk about today, but this is going to be the last. We'll just share this story and then we'll quit. This is a story about Ruth and Naomi. Okay? It's from the book of Ruth. And so we'll just read through this story and just listen for this. During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of that man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. So there's a map there. So I'm going to show you on this map. So the little black thing at the top there, that's a lake, the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Gennesaret, whichever they call it. And then there's a line going down to the bottom one is the Dead Sea, the lowest place in that part of the world. And so between Lake Gennesaret, or the Sea of Galilee at the top to the bottom, that's kind of a straight line down through there. That's the Jordan River. So on this side, there's Bethlehem. That's Israel and Judah. And then you go across the Jordan River, and that's Moab. So they went back east to where there was been some rain, where there was some food to eat. So it'd be kind of like if we were going back to central Missouri to live until there was some food, okay? I'm from Missouri, so I could do that. Some of you would not be happy about that. But that's kind of what that would be. It's not around the world. They didn't sail in a boat for 40 days or anything, okay? But they had to move to find food and jobs. Verse 3, but Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Here's the income giver. And then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves, Moabite women, where they were living, and the name of the first was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth, and they lived there for about 10 years. Okay, so they're taking care of mom, the boys are, and the daughter, and their wives. But both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only the woman was left without her 2 children and without her husband. Now there's a problem. You understand why I mentioned earlier how these worked in that day and time. She lost her husband. She lost both of her sons and everything that meant anything to her. She's in a foreign land. She's a long way from home. The only thing she knows is she's got to get back home, and maybe there's some family there that can help her get through the rest of her life. So there's no unemployment, and there's no retirement checks from the government. Instead, your children take care of you in your old age. But what about her sons? They're dead, right? She's lost both her sons. Let's go on to verse 6. Then she arose along with her daughters-in-law to return from the field of Moab, because while in the territory of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had paid attention to his people by providing food for them. In other words, the drought was over, the famine was over, there was food, there were jobs again, and so she's ready to move home. She left the place where she had been, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her. They went along the road to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, turn back, each of you, to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me." So apparently they were good daughters-in-law. They helped take care of her. "May the Lord provide for you so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and wept. But they replied to her, "No, instead we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb, so that there would be husbands for you?" Now, let me mention this real quick. The tradition and the law stated that if a woman's husband died, then the younger son was supposed to marry that woman, even if he already had a spouse, marry that woman and have children to honor the brother, and so that this woman, the widow, would have children to provide for her in her old age. Okay? So will there be sons in my womb? And so would they be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go, I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters, for this is more bitter for me than for you, since the Lord's will has come out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law. I want you to listen to what Ruth says here. These are very familiar words. Listen, because this is where these words come from that you've heard probably many times. Don't urge me to abandon you, Ruth says, to turn back from following you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so even if even death separates me from you. What a powerful pledge from this younger Ruth to care for the older Naomi. So what happens in the rest of the story is Ruth and Naomi go back to Bethlehem, and Ruth starts caring for Naomi. Now, they did not have the welfare system. I talked about that. They didn't have Social Security like we know today in those days. So God provided for the poor with the stipulation. He told the farmer that if they dropped grain, they were not supposed to pick it back up as they were taking it to the threshing machine. And around the edges where there would be some weeds mixed in, to not harvest that, leave that, so that the poor people could come and glean from those crops and have food to eat. So every day, Ruth went out, and she would glean from the fields. She would get the grain from the edges of the fields, and she would provide for Naomi. So you see, finally in the Bible, you see this beautiful picture of family caring for one another. What happens is Naomi shares wisdom with Ruth about how to survive in Israel. She advised Ruth how to attract a good Jewish husband. And eventually Ruth married a man named Boaz. And Ruth well, you know, God had been working through this tragedy. God made things turn good, even though things have been bad. God does that still today. Ruth and Boaz had a son, and who had a son, and that son's name would be great-great-grandson, would be David, the greatest king of Israel. Wow, how God provided through what started out as a mess. Generations later, Jesus was born into this same family. This is the family where the daughter-in-law insisted on caring for her mother-in-law. It's important that we care for our family. So today I want to invite you to think about the ways that you can minister to your parents as well as to your children. We're going to have a time of prayer in just a second here, but I want you to consider, I want us to take just a little bit of time this morning. Maybe your families are deceased, maybe they've passed, and you're here and you can't see them right now. God can see them. But maybe it for your benefit, and maybe just you want to just give God thanks for your mom or your dad or both. You know, as you're standing here today, and I don't know, sometimes I guess I kind of ask God to give a special hug, you know, for me, because I can't do it anymore. And so, you know, somehow God surely listens to our prayers and takes care of those things, even in heaven. So maybe we need to stop for a few moments today and give thanks to for our parents. Now, we also may need to, at this point, take a few moments and maybe ask for forgiveness or give forgiveness to our parents, either one of those, because, you know, that's a part of where we've been in life. And so I'm going to take just a few seconds. I'm just going to, in silence this morning, maybe the prayer that you need to pray in your family as it deals with your parents, whatever age you're at. And if your parents are still alive, then thank God for them and ask God how you can to guide you in being a better child to them. And if your parents are in the room and you're sitting close enough, maybe just touch their arm or something there and let them know that you love them and pray God's blessings on them. Let's just take a few moments and you pray the prayer that fits in your family this morning in silence.